During the 1970s, Great Britain went through a war that waged between a ministry and a radical insurgent group unrecognized by Her Majesty's government. Unknown to the Muggles clamoring over social contracts and trade unions, a savage war raged in the shadows. It was a civil war like no other, the deadliest since the dark days of Gellert Grindelwald. There were heroes and villains on both sides, Voldemort's Death Eaters and the Order of the Phoenix. One witch made a notable name for herself within the Order of the Phoenix. Minerva Mcgonagall was born to a Muggle father and a magical mother on October 3rd, 1935. She was a natural prodigy, showcasing an ability with magic at a very young age. As an adolescent, she attended Hogwarts, where she excelled under the House of Gryffindor. She tested perfect on both her OWLs and her Newts. Her impressive test scores landed her a job at the Ministry of Magic immediately after her schooling ended, taking a role within magical law enforcement. But the ministry was not McGonagall's passion. In 2 short years, she returned to Hogwarts, where she discovered that teaching was her desire. She would even go on to hold on her tenure as the Transfiguration professor for several decades. She was invaluable to the Order of the Phoenix, not only as a soldier during the First War, but as a guardian and a caretaker in the Second. Her extensive knowledge of magic, especially that of transfiguration, extended to her battle prowess as much as it did to her tutelage. There was another notable wizard in the Wizarding War, besides he who must not be named. Second in command to the Death Eaters, a blood purist through and through, Lucius Malfoy was as malicious as he was deadly. Born to a witch and wizard in 1954, Lucius Malfoy was quickly molded into an undisputed bigot. It was no surprise when he was sorted into the House of Slytherin when he attended Hogwarts. Ambitious, determined, and unrelenting, Lucius quickly garnered the interest of other dark wizards, notably Lord Voldemort. He served in both Wizarding Wars, contributing more in the first than he did the second. But when it came down to it, Malfoy's investments lied in his own self-interest. After the First War, he claimed to be under the Imperius Curse, saving himself from criminal prosecution. After the Second War, he gave up his Death Eater cohorts, exonerating himself from prosecution once again. Though he was as much a snake as his Slytherin title would suggest, his wit and power should never be underestimated. Typically, I deal with each character in their primes. For this particular matchup, I will not. Instead, I will be taking these characters as they existed together in the same timeline, just before the Second Wizarding War. At the age of 61, McGonagall was well outside her physical prime. Reflex and dexterity were a primary concern to a witch or wizard in the middle of a heated duel. Though Minerva was an elderly woman, she seemed to keep up her combative effectiveness during the Second Wizarding War. During her school days, McGonagall was the captain of her Quidditch team, a sport that demanded the most astute mind and able body. What's more, Minerva was an animagus, able to transform into a tabby cat. That all said, while she could be perceived as nothing more but an elder woman, she was extremely able-bodied, keeping up with much younger adversaries. Lucius Malfoy was also outside his physical prime, but only by a decade, maybe less. His physical description, outside of his handsomeness, was pretty nondescript. He was a male of average height and weight. His participation in the 2 Wizarding Wars indicate reflexes that were top tier. As Voldemort's top lieutenant, he would have been in top shape, honing his dexterity. Contending with Aurors, special officers specifically trained to take down dark wizards, definitely bodes well for Malfoy's effectiveness with a wand. Speculative, for sure, but the only thing we have to go off of in terms of Lucius. While it's clear that Lucius gets a physical advantage over Minerva, it does not mean that she is completely out of her element. Her fight with Voldemort during the Battle of Hogwarts represents that she was very capable to keep up with a high-intensity duel. Granted, she had the help of Kingsley Shacklebolt and Horace Slughorn. That said, Lucius had 2 decades of youth over Minerva, and his reflexes would be a step above, even if only slight. Lucius Malfoy gets the edge for his physical attributes. Minerva Mcgonagall was a noted specialist of transfiguration, though she was accomplished in all forms of magic. Minerva carried a 9.5-inch wand made of fir wood with a core of dragon heartstring. Fir wood was considered the survivor's wand, according to Garrick Ollivander. It was extremely strong and created powerful magic when coupled with transfiguration. This power and resiliency holds true for the core of the wand, dragon heartstring, which was noted with great power, though it was a tad unreliable. Lucius was also an extraordinary duelist, fighting many experienced Aurors during the First and Secondary Wizarding War. Unlike most wizards, he carried 2 magical objects instead of the standard one. He possessed both a cane and a wand made of elm, and his wand had a core of dragon heartstring. Though never mentioned in the book, his cane seemed to possess a defensive charm. This was likely against minor attacks rather than the more complex curses. In direct contradiction to his dragon heartstring core, elm was known to produce the least amount of errors. The combination of elm and dragon heartstring was something of a perfect balance of power and consistency. Trained by Albus Dumbledore himself, Minerva Mcgonagall was a great talent with transfiguration. Next to defense against the dark arts and perhaps charms, transfiguration seemed to have the most applications in a wand duel. Dumbledore himself was the previous transfiguration professor, and he used it to great effect in his duel against Voldemort. Likewise, McGonagall used everything in her environment to her benefit, transforming anything that could help her achieve an advantage. Minerva was also quite skilled with charms. During her fight with Severus Snape, she turned a simple torch of fire into a lasso of flame, then into a serpent, then into a dozen daggers. She was also capable of producing 3 Patronus charms at once. Judging by her use of the Imperius Curse, Minerva was quite familiar with both defense against the dark arts and the dark arts itself. It would seem that any witch or wizard of noteworthy standing had a grasp on the unforgivable curses, even though they were illegal. When it came to wand dueling, Minerva was as efficient and creative as she was stern. It goes without saying, Lucius Malfoy was an accomplished dark wizard, capable of the unforgivable curses in both practice and theory. He used the Imperius Curse on several Ministry officials during the Second Wizarding War, tortured countless wizards with the Cruciatus Curse, and he attempted the use of the Killing Curse on Harry Potter before Dobby stopped him. During the First Wizarding War, Lucius was likely on the front lines of many skirmishes against high-ranking Aurors. Considering that he made it out of the war unscathed and unaccused speaks to not only his skill, but his intellect. Malfoy's dueling style was marked by elegance and efficiency. In almost direct contrast to his sister-in-law, Bellatrix Lestrange, he favored more subtlety in his wand movements instead of the more flamboyant arrangements. For this, Malfoy was balanced between his offensive and defensive movesets, capable of cursing his foe as easily as he could defend against a hex. Both Minerva and Lucius were powerful magicians. McGonagall's knowledge of transfiguration was probably more deep than Lucius's own knowledge of the dark arts. Malfoy's wand could produce more consistent magic than Minerva, playing into a style of efficient wand flourishes. But it would seem that McGonagall's own knowledge of the dark arts, coupled with her mastery of transfiguration and her extensive understanding of charms, would place her magical powers above Lucius Malfoy. Minerva McGonagall gets the edge for her magical abilities. Minerva Mcgonagall was one of the very few Hogwarts students to cause a hat stall during the sorting ceremony. The sorting hat took 5.5 minutes, when decisions were usually made within seconds, to decide that McGonagall was best suited for Gryffindor instead of Ravenclaw. With this, we can take away that Minerva was not only courageous, which was the chief attribute of the house, but she was also quick-witted. Minerva was an extremely rigid and stern witch. She had a very strong moral foundation, especially when it came to her students. Her attention was unwavering, and very little could break her stonewall composure. Offensively, she has displayed a quick draw and an inventive mind. Based on her primary focus on transfiguration, I would suspect that her tactics to be chiefly distraction and diversion, keeping her opponent off their toes until she can open up their defenses. She certainly had the diversity of spells to do so. She likely used transfiguration to use objects as distraction, forcing her opponent to keep an eye out for a flying book or a suit of armor. Defensively, I think her spells would be much the same, transfiguring anything around her to defend against curses she could not stonewall with a shield charm. This would be done in a similar vein as Dumbledore, who used a Ministry of Magic statue to defend against Voldemort's killing curses. Because of his opulent lifestyle, Lucius held himself in a high regard, and in doing so, he carried himself with elegance and dignity. Much like his son, Draco Malfoy, it only took mere seconds to decide that he belonged in Slytherin. Marked by his ambition, crafted by his sense of purpose, Malfoy quickly climbed the socio-political landscape of the Ministry of Magic and the Death Eaters. Lucius was an extremely intolerant individual, taking pride in his blood purity and turning his nose to Muggles and Muggleborns alike. This conceited nature would translate into his own dueling style. Offensively, Malfoy was a man of economical movement, leaving nothing to waste. This is most evident in his fight with Sirius Black and the Department of Mysteries. Unlike Black's flamboyant wand flourishes, Malfoy kept his movements succinct. Defensively, Lucius held to the same principles, short and efficient shield charms, used with his wand and cane. This round is a comparison between a witch of complexity and a wizard of simplicity. As noted by McGonagall, transfiguration was the most complex set of magic. Her use of it in a duel kept her foe off guard, unsettled. Malfoy's tight sequences of movement would help him defend against most of her attacks, countering effectively. But his more straightforward, rigid spell work would be easily predicted. And as we saw in his fight with Sirius Black, a flamboyant fighter, his defenses could be penetrated. This is not to say that McGonagall was a fancy fighter, but her use of transfiguration could become overwhelming. For this, my bets would lie with McGonagall for a slight edge with her tactical abilities. The fight between Minerva Mcgonagall and Lucius Malfoy would be a fight of efficiency by two different means. McGonagall achieved efficiency by way of distraction, using secondary attacks as her primary procedure to open up her opponents to attack. Lucius was efficient in a much more straightforward way, relying on skill to cut through his opponent's guard through deft wand work. Let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place in the middle of Diagon Alley. As a final tally, I would say the advantage to the victor goes 8 to 10. The following is a hypothetical battle of one majority victory. The duelists would stand several paces away from each other, drawing their wands with equally fast gestures. Lucius would press the offensive advantage, his short movements just a hair faster than McGonagall's. The witch would begin transfiguring storefronts and objects into pestering rabbits and frogs. The creatures bounce in front of Lucius's killing curses, taking the damage in full. With Malfoy distracted, Minerva would likely press her own offensive advantage, using more straightforward wand work against Lucius. But the wizard turns her away with his cane, keeping her transfigured objects and her spells at bay. Using her skill with charms, Minerva would enchant a sign or a broom from one of the storefronts to smack Lucius across the arm. Distracted yet again, Malfoy is too slow to counter McGonagall's disarming spell, stripped of his cane. As the fight goes on, Lucius will become overwhelmed. He is able to keep up through efficient wand work and the natural consistency of his elm wand, but desks keep turning into pigs, bricks keep vanishing under his feet, keeping him off balance, and clouds keep hanging over his head, raining down on him relentlessly. Eventually, it would be too much. With a deft motion of her wrist, McGonagall disarms Lucius of his wand. With another twist and wave, she traps Lucius in a knot of tight rope. And thus, I declare Minerva McGonagall, the premier transfiguration professor, the victor. Of course, this is all my opinion. Please leave your thoughts and comments below. Do you think that Lucius was swift enough to overcome McGonagall? Or do you agree that the witch would take the majority? And as always, peace, love, and mischief managed.
I only did what was necessary, and I truly do regret it.
Not only would a duel between Bellatrix Lestrange and Severus Snape be a fantastic and close matchup, but it would be very probable as well.
Alright, cool. So you're Hagrid, I am the boy who lived. So I cheated a little bit. I played last night just to see how to play.